Welcome to Sass Bites. This is your weekly bite of Sass during your lunch break. I'm your host, Micah Godbolt. Today, unfortunately, Elise will not be able to make it here, so we'll just be able to mock her for not being here and call her. No, we're gonna miss her huge. It's really awesome having her on the show, but the show will go on. So if you haven't been following recently, we've been in the middle of a series of interviews with various people throughout the industry, focused specifically on this concept of front-end architecture. I spoke about it last year at CSS DevConf, and the notion is that there's a lot of people doing this thing of front-end architecture, whether or not we know it or not, whether that's our title or not. So I've been trying to grab some of the people out there that are kind of exemplifying what this is, and our guest is nothing short of that. So before we get into that, I want to give a quick update as this whole kind of trying to put the pieces together of exactly what front-end architecture is has been changing a little bit over time as we're developing it. And one of the things that I came across is the fourth pillar of front-end architecture I used to have as being automation, basically taking all your stuff and then just automating it with Grunt or whatever you're doing for your build process. And realizing that's a little short-sighted because there's a little bit more around that. It still kind of has to do with process, but it's a little bit wider, where it's not just the build process, but what's your like your onboarding process, what's your build process, what's your Git workflow, are you doing Git flow, are you doing branches, like how are you working those branches out, and then also what's your deployment strategies of like the current project we're working on, we're actually distributing through Bower, and you could distribute your styles through a gem, or so you have those workflows as well. So I've changed the concept of just build process to process. So what's the process of code basically getting from a developer's brain and getting into the browser, and that's that whole process there. So anyway, that's a quick little update front-end architecture. If you're curious, I'll send a link out sometime. I know I've posted it before. I've got a Git repo that kind of has all these documents in there, and happy to take merge requests and comments and submit issues and those kind of things as well. So anyway, that's the update on that. Today we have a very esteemed guest. Excited to have him on. He is the author of SMACSS, and he not only made it, but he wrote about it. So it's a great book website as well that you can get. He speaks all over the place. I know that's the first place that I met him was last year in Denver, which was a whole lot of fun. And he's the lead front-end developer, or may I say maybe front-end architect at Shopify. So everyone, welcome Jonathan Snook. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Very awesome. Appreciate you taking some time to come out and talk to us about front-end architecture. Before we jump into the meat and potatoes of this, we wanted to dive into a little sassy drama. And I don't know, it's not a huge bit of drama, but something I've kind of seen bubbling up over the last couple of weeks as a lot of people are making the shift from LibSass over to LibSass. And we were talking before the show, and you're kind of interested in that as well, right? Is that something you're pursuing at Shopify?
Yeah, it's something we're keeping an eye on. One of the problems with maintaining a huge code base, we've actually developed some of our own Sass functions that like handle some of the SVG niceties, for example, and our compile times have actually gotten quite large. So we are looking at ways to optimize that and looking at possibly LibSass as a way to do that. So definitely keeping an eye on things at the moment.
Yeah, and you're just you're waiting for like a good quality build to come down the pipe, right?
Yeah, the big thing for us is that we are still a Rails house, a Ruby house, so we need to make sure that we have something that integrates well with that, that can deal with sprockets, and so sometimes we are a little bit behind the curve because we have to wait for things to either update or monkey patch things in order to get things into production, which is unfortunate, but we got to deal with the tools we got.
That's interesting. I haven't even thought about the notion of a Ruby shop using the lib version of Sass. So how does LibSass even get into a Ruby project? Because I know there's a Node version, which eventually gets to Grunt, which eventually gets to Gulp. So what's the process for getting that into Ruby?
Admittedly, my knowledge of it is very rudimentary, but I believe one of the contributors to LibSass had tried to create a Ruby port or a Rails port specifically for it. So I've been keeping an eye on it. I did like a really quick afternoon, like let me see if I can get this thing working, and couldn't. But again, my knowledge of Rails unfortunately is very basic, and I'm good on the front end. I'm good on the PHP back end, but when it comes to Ruby on Rails, I still have to. I have a lot of learning to do.
Yeah, I understand, but that certainly brings up the same kind of topic of, when we with LibSass, basically you install a gem, which is gem install Sass, and then you're done. You start installing Sass. So we have a little bit more of a workflow now to get from the LibSass, the core C version, into something that actually works. And each implementation being different, and each implementation requiring somebody to actually build and also service that implementation if there's bugs and those kind of things. So what I'd seen in this last week is, especially in Grunt Sass and Gulp Sass, kind of watching those, is that some of the newest versions or some of the newest features in LibSass, we're finally getting into Node Sass, but then some of those were getting into Gulp before it was getting into Grunt, and you had that disparity. You had the fact that not all these features were actually being able to get all the way down the pipe into something that you could actually use. Often held up. I think the Grunt one was held up because of a Windows issue or something like that. Like they just couldn't get a passing test, and so they weren't able to release that. And it's just like, I miss the days of, hey, there's a new gem, install. There's a new pre-release.
We still have some of those kind of similar issues, even on the Rails side, with again, mentioning sprockets and how a lot of the features that were in Sass 3.3 weren't immediately compatible with sprockets, and so we did have to wait for an update or kind of deal with some of the error messages that it was throwing at us, and being okay with that. And so, thankfully, everything's up to date now. But just when you're dealing with a lot of tooling, you're going to have to deal with a lot of dependencies. We used to have Node as sort of integrated with our Rails project as well, and then it became just sort of this dependency nightmare. Like, not only do you have to make sure that all your gems are up to date and that all the dependencies are inline on the Ruby side, but you also had to do the same thing with npm. And just, we have different projects, where we have an asset gem, for example, that is used on both our marketing and our sort of core admin product. And in the beginning, we're like, okay, well, what about all the dependencies? Like, if one site decides to upgrade to Sass 3.4 and the other one is still on 3.3, are there any backwards compatibility issues, or do we have to wait until everybody upgrades before we can sort of be at parity across the board? There's definitely, with just large complex systems, you're going to have dependencies, and you're going to have to sometimes maybe wait a little bit before all those dependencies are resolved.
And in this case, I think the other thing I found kind of, I guess, different about this is we've, at least as a community of Sass users, and so I guess specifically talking about Sass, we've always kind of been a tight-knit community, and so now our community has grown to not just being the Sass and the Ruby folk, but we also have all these C people and people working in JavaScript and Node and Grunt, and like this community has grown, and there's all these new people that we hadn't actually interacted with before. So lots of new relationships and lots of learning about new people, and it's just been a really interesting dynamic shift, because we've just been so used to kind of had a small tight-knit community of Ruby gems just came out and you start using them, and so it's fun. I mean, hopefully it's all going to pan out. It's going to be nice to have some fresh people into the community, and hopefully we'll be able to get these chains moving a little bit faster. Especially as people find ways they can contribute, to get those tests passing and those kind of things. So new contribution opportunities as well. So I think that's probably going to be a good thing for the community in general. So we came here today to talk about you and to talk about especially SMACSS and just everything you're doing, because it's really exciting to kind of be talking to somebody who I consider had one of the first front-end architectures. I mean, when the first thing you kind of deal with when you get into larger scale is how do you organize things, whether that's like an OOCSS or SMACSS. So it really was one of the first things I came across of like, well, you have a folder for this and a folder for this, and you stretch things out. So how did you come to this? Like, what was your aha moment of like I want to do more than just code. I want to actually start thinking about the organization of it and thinking about how we can create these structures that actually build these larger systems? When did you realize, when did that happen for you? What was that moment?
It's interesting how my path actually somewhat mirrors Nicole Sullivan's with OOCSS. A lot of the concepts, as I understand it, that she had come up with years ahead of what I had come up with SMACSS, was as a result of her work at Yahoo. And for me, it was actually the same thing. I came into Yahoo and was now working on a lot of projects where we wanted to make sure that there was design consistency across all those projects, and we felt like one of the ways to do that was to establish code consistency. In other words, building out this code library that everybody had access to, and sharing that across like Yahoo Mail, Calendar, Messenger, and a number of other projects that were all sort of part of this umbrella that we were developing for. And there was definitely a point where the techniques that I was using, which were small sites or projects that I would build, and the companies would take them away and maintain them, and I would never really see them again. And realizing that some of the approaches and techniques that I had been using were no longer working. And so how do we look at scaling our development process, not only for larger teams, but also across multiple teams? So there was definitely a lot of research that I had done, and Nicole Sullivan's OOCSS was one of the big things out there. There wasn't a whole lot of stuff out there. I mean, nobody had written a book on this. Nobody had really kind of looked at the whole picture. And so, Gina Bolton had some talks on CSS maintenance, and I watched those. Natalie Down had a presentation on maintaining CSS, and it's interesting to kind of actually go back and look through the slide decks and realize, yeah, actually a lot of the stuff that I talk about in SMACSS is taken from all of these things. I don't want to say that I'm original, because I have taken what the community had already put out there and really just wanted to try to bring it all together into a book, because nobody had done that up until that point.
Mm-hmm. And that's similar with what I'm trying to purport with front-end architecture is that excuse me. None of this is new. I mean, none of it's new at all. We're talking about code, whether it's OO or whatever approach you're taking for organizing your code. We're talking about style guides, which obviously are a big thing, and people are doing awesome things with them. Automated testing, lots of people doing awesome stuff with that, and then process and automation. All those things are already set. So it's just more of a matter of like, how can we put them together into kind of a cohesive package, and then how you get those into a project properly. Do you have templates set up beforehand? How do you get talking to clients and customers about that? So it's always, and it's kind of a nice part about the community is it's a very open sharing community of people want you to take the stuff they're talking about. They want you to take your tools and make them into even better things. So certainly nothing wrong with that. So basically, this void that you saw of things not being pulled together is what led you to SMACSS then, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I saw an opportunity and decided to go for it, and put together something that I thought kind of brought all the concepts that I had been working on together. And it's funny because I kind of wish Elise was on this call. She was so the March in the year before I had released SMACSS, I was doing a workshop with some friends of mine. We had sidebar workshops, and Elise was in that workshop in Austin, and I remember mentioning I've been thinking, and I had this concept I wouldn't mind writing on a book, and then 6 months later I actually had put that book together, and finally had an opportunity to release that. So it was. I'd be kind of curious to see what her recollection of that would have been.
So I've been trying to remember, he was crazy. It was a crazy idea. No, I'll definitely have to get her feedback. We'll hear her story about that maybe next week or something like that.
Nice.
So one thing I know that she was really curious about, this was the question that she was really wanting to ask you, was when SMACSS was born, when OCSS was around, it was very much about how you organize with CSS. Because that's basically what we had to use back then. That was our tools. So things have changed, obviously, dramatically. It kind of what brought me along this path was finding Sass and realizing that, oh, I can actually start breaking up my files into smaller pieces. Okay, what kind of pieces do I break these into, and like how do I organize these pieces, and down that road, and realizing that there was very little that had been written about how those pieces get organized. What's your file structure, how things get imported and organized, those kind of things. So the last couple of years, I think really everyone's been kind of going through that process of, okay, these are the files we have, this is how our Sass comes together, and being able to break things out into pieces. So how or if has Sass and the proliferation of Sass changed SMACSS? Has it changed your workflow with it at all? Have there been any updates or tweaks you've had to make for it?
No, definitely no real tweaks. I mean, one of the things that I tried to accomplish with the book was make it as generalized as possible. That I didn't want it tied to a specific tool set, and a lot of that is reflective of my own personal development style, which tends to shun a lot of tooling. If I start up a new project, I will open my text editor and I will edit a plain CSS file, and I start there. And then once I sort of start getting the basics in place, I'll start breaking it up as need be. And again, for a lot of projects, if I was working on, let's say, a new blog design today, that yes, I'll probably still use the sort of the SMACSS concepts, but a blog design, you've got a home page and an inside page. There's not a lot of complexity to that, and so as a result of that, I wouldn't have a need to like break this into 10 different files and do lots of crazy Sass functions and mix-ins and stuff for something that is going to be relatively straightforward to put together. And I do recommend people understand how CSS works as opposed to coming at it from a Sass perspective, and I think that knowledge is super helpful in just simplifying a lot of the CSS. Now, with that said, I think that Sass does bring a lot of really handy things with it. I mean, one, just compiling my files into a single file is huge. I mean, when we're looking at a large project and with Yahoo and at Shopify, dealing with a design system that has dozens of modules, right, and breaking each of those pieces down, having it in one big file would just be very difficult to manage. People wouldn't really know where it was. You'd be getting merge conflicts every time. So that ability to compartmentalize is hugely advantageous. And then you have this tool set that kind of is very similar to like Bootstrap, right? And the kind of building your own personal Bootstrap toolkit, and the Sass is very advantageous for facilitating that kind of development.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So not a huge change, but you're definitely enjoying be able to break things into files and be able to. Do you use? We had some big discussions a couple weeks ago about mix-ins versus extends. Do you fall on either side of that, or are you a big user of either one?
I am a minimalist. When it comes to extend, I pretty much never use extend. I have yet to see it actually prove to be advantageous. I understand the concept behind it. I understand what people are trying to accomplish, but the modular approach means that my modules, I want to be fairly simple, and I want them to be fairly standalone. And when you're extending across modules, for example, then you have suddenly tied these things together. I know a lot of people will set up placeholders and will extend placeholders. But I find that when people are doing this, they're often approaching the problem from a context perspective. In other words, hey, I've got a product list and I have an events list. So I'm going to create a products class and an events class, and I'm going to have it extend this common object. And to which I would say, well, why not just create that common object and apply that to these two list views? Because if I create a third one, I don't necessarily want to take that and have it extend this thing as well. Extending within a given module, so having this base button style, for example, and then extending that base button style, I can see some advantages, but interestingly enough, in a lot of the workshops that I've done, I kind of describe some reasons why actually even that kind of extension to me isn't all that beneficial, and that the naming convention and really just sticking to a decent naming convention actually solves a lot of problems and creates a lot of clarity around the kind of development that just trying to use things like Sass extends doesn't solve.
Mm-hmm. So you're still taking a bit more of like an OO approach, where if you have one specific title that has, a visual appearance, it has a class, and anytime you want to ever use those styles, you just apply the class to the markup, correct?
Yep, that's exactly it.
Yeah. So when I 100% understand that. I mean, there's no reason to have multiple things extending it if you're just going to be applying those classes into the markup. I know in 2 weeks, I believe, Ben Frayne, are you familiar with him?
I am, yes.
Yeah. I love the stuff he's writing, so I'm really excited to have him on. I know his approach is pretty much a polar opposite of that, where we're breaking things up into these small pieces that are all namespaced and all have their own styles attached to them, and is basically inheriting styles into it versus or composing styles into it, as opposed to inheriting from whatever the markup is. So it'll be interesting to kind of get those comparisons. But yeah, I certainly see if you're doing classes into the markup, there really isn't much need to duplicate using extends or even mixins in those cases, because you would use the class over and over again.
Exactly.
For me, that's exactly what an extend is. It allows you to use that class over and over again without actually having to go into the markup to make those changes. So, yeah. And a lot of that also for me, I know, comes from I don't do a lot of application development. I do a lot more of media and content development for like Drupal sites and whatnot. And in those cases, we have a lot of these like big nodes of stuff that's a lot easier to apply the styles onto the selectors as opposed to going in and changing classes to get in there. So I'm sure application development can be a bit different. So speaking of application development, the last thing I want to hit on is, so how is all of this SMACSS, all of this front-end architecture, whatever we're going to call it, how is that coming into Spotify? How is that making your job at Spotify that much easier? Like, what do you do at Spotify? I'm kind of curious.
I'm going to correct you, unfortunately. And
Shopify. Sorry, I wrote it right, and
you did
totally wrong.
you wrote it right in the show notes, everybody. He did have it correct, but that is probably the most common mispronunciation of Shopify that happens. Yes, people will call in to Shopify and like, yeah, something's wrong with my Spotify store, and it's like, oh, so close.
Unfortunate naming conventions.
Yeah, so I'm one of the lead front-end developers at Shopify. We actually have two major teams right now. One in Ottawa that actually works on the admin product. So all the store owners at Shopify will use that. And then we have a team in Toronto that works on a lot of our sort of what we call growth projects. So Shopify.com. They do a lot of the theme development. So stuff that's a little bit more external facing, and it's interesting to see actually that the two of us as teams have different constraints and how we try to solve those problems. We try to get as similar as possible, but realize that we have to diverge in areas. And so, one of the things that I'm trying to do as lead developer is establish a lot more consistency. We for a long time actually didn't have a front-end team on the admin product, which we would look to developers and expect them to be completely full stack, and we also hired some fantastic designers that knew how to do front-end code. So, but there was no system really established. When I had started there 3 years ago now, I came in and slowly started kind of picking things apart, this sort of massive file, because when I started there, it was one big, huge style sheet.
Wow.
We use Sass, in some way you could say we had solved the architectural problem, but really we hadn't. And so trying to break off these little pieces into this modular system has actually taken a long time. As we build up a new design or add a new feature, figuring out how to mold the design system within the design team, we've actually developed the design systems team to establish those patterns and create more consistency across the board, and getting a better understanding of our code base. Thankfully we're seeing a lot more tooling out, things like Parker and stuff like that can really give us a better understanding of how complex our code base is.
And what is Parker?
Parker is a based CSS tool that will analyze your CSS and will provide metrics like selectors that are completely out of whack, or if you've got inlined images, you've base 64 images that are just way too big and probably shouldn't be in your CSS, and a number of different things. There's a few other tools that I've tried. Analyze CSS is another one.
Okay.
And I find it's really handy when you're taking a look at converting a code base that is a mess and then moving it towards something that isn't. You want to understand where the problem areas, what areas do you need to focus on, and I find this tooling can be extremely helpful. We had done some of our own analytics, for example, and discovered that close to 10% of our CSS wasn't being used anywhere in the project, and that's just like dead code, right? So having an opportunity to recognize this, to fix those problems and clean up those problems is a lot of work, and so my job is to get the team together and figure out how we can solve this problem and build a better system for the entire company to use.
Certainly. So you've talked about one tool with Parker. What are some of the other tools that you use? We talk a lot here about automation, your Rails shop, so you have more of a Rails pipeline, but also style guides, automated testing. Is there anything that you're using in those departments?
With style guides, we right now have our own custom-built system. It is not automated, which has been problematic because we do have a code base that's being contributed to by people outside of the Fed team, that we have designers and developers around the company contributing to the core base, which is fantastic. That everybody has the opportunity to contribute, but not everybody is aware of how we should be documenting things, and so the style guide right now does get out of sync with the actual code, and so how do we figure out how to get that in line? How do we enforce that people are documenting their code properly? We are, I think, going to be looking at more automation tools, finding out how we can create a better process. But at the same time, sometimes documentation can't be automated, right? Like you still need sometimes a lot more custom content that you have to write to explain how things should work. Our SVG workflow, for example, we have 3 different ways to implement SVGs in a project based on certain pros and cons. In some cases, you might want to inline your stuff into the HTML. Thankfully, we support current browsers, i.e. 10 and 11 on admin, which is nice. Chrome, nice. Firefox, all latest versions. And so we can do things like embedding the SVG right in the page, and then we can use CSS to do hover states and active states and stuff like that with the inline CSS. Like that's a really handy thing. But at the same time, if you have an image that you want to use 20 times on one page, well, okay, maybe you actually want to embed it once and then use the use tag essentially to use that thing that you need in multiple places. We can do that, and we have a workflow for that. Sometimes you still want to have the SVG embedded into your CSS file, and so we have that kind of workflow. And how do you explain to someone which method to use, which Sass function should you use, which Rails helper should you use, and that's hard to do in sort of this automated testing or automated documentation process. There needs to be somebody who writes up a document that says, here are the 3 how you do it, here's why you do those things, and yeah, it requires time to build that stuff out.
Yeah, documentation is always going to be a mix of we have pages and pages of like how-tos, and this is how you build an icon font, and these are the these are the different options you have for this. So we have lots of pages of written documentation, and then interspersed with that, things that also build directly from the markup and styles in our system as well. So it's there's certainly there's a balance needs to happen there. And then also that accountability portion of it is too. So when you have pull requests coming in that have changes, some type of reviewing system that allows you to go, okay, well, is the documentation updated as well? Like I know our stories now have like, build something, document something. So those steps have to get done before it even gets into the review process. But yeah, it's always it's a process. You got to set those standards down and make sure people are doing that. So
yeah, and it's hard because it feels like it slows everything down, right? Like, well, gone are the days where I could just add a couple lines of CSS, commit it, not worry about code reviews, not worry about documentation, and now suddenly, okay, actually getting this code in is going to take me days because not only do I have to write these lines of code, I need to write the documentation, I need to go through code reviews, and that's
testing, and
yeah, I mean it's a lengthy process, and hopefully at the end what we have is a more understandable code base, that we have a more maintainable code base, that it's easier to come back to that code 6 months down the road and go, oh, I know exactly what that's for, and I know how to fix it. I don't have to spend half a day figuring out how everything is like intertwined across the entire code base to realize like, okay, if I change that thing, it's going to break this and that. Or not knowing it's going to break this and that, make the change anyway, and then start getting bug reports because nobody saw that stuff happening.
Yeah, and it wasn't documented that was supposed to happen that way. So speaking of bug reports and changing things and breaking things, are you getting into visual regression testing? Is that something kind of on the horizon for your team?
It's on the horizon. It hasn't been something that we've implemented yet. One of the problems is just the way our code base is set up right now, and trying to understand, okay, how do we structure our code in a way to make visual regression testing easier? Because if you can take any given page within Shopify, and it can actually exist in a dozen different states, depending on any number of factors. So like your orders page, what you see when you have 0 orders versus 1 order versus 50 orders is going to be different. If you have certain notifications showing you that you have expired orders coming up, if you have test orders, there's a whole bunch of things that go into what a page could look like, and so it actually becomes really difficult to test on a per page basis. I think having some visual testing would certainly go a long way. It would certainly save some of the manual effort that exists now. But I mean, I think the way our code base is set up, we could never get to 100%. So we need to rethink how we actually create our components to be able to test them on a per component level, and having the consistency at that level so that when we roll out that component across the board, we know we're going to have consistency across the board.
Yeah, that's the approach we've been taking with Phantom CSS, which is a specific visual regression testing tool that allows for that, where it combines with Casper.js. So when Phantom.js spins up its page, it actually just takes a screenshot of one specific item on the page. So you can actually do visual diffs of just that component with the exact bounding box of whatever that selector is.
Nice.
So at that point, you can say that one block, that one notification window, that one whatever. You can start having some consistency where you can actually keep testing it over and over again. And that's the goal for us is every component that gets built has tests built into it. And then whenever a new merge request comes in, that those tests have to pass before the code comes in. Because a failing test basically means that something in that changed, accidentally, because you changed some variable that you didn't realize was going to affect some other page. So it's coming along. I would definitely say check that out if you have an opportunity. But it's also making sure that you have those things to test, making sure things are broken up into the pieces that you actually can test. So it's a new world. There's still a lot of new stuff with visual regression testing, a lot of process stuff that we're still trying to deal out. But it's good to hear that it's at least on the radar for you, and I hope you find a solution that works for you.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
It's certainly not easy thing to bite off. So cool. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun stuff happening at Shopify, and just for an opportunity for a slight plug, you guys hiring at all?
Oh, we are, absolutely. We are hiring all across the board. We have 3 offices right now, one in Toronto, one in Ottawa, and one in Montreal. Yeah, if you're interested, check out the careers page, shopify.com/careers. We got a couple listings there. I'd love to work with you.
And I've never applied for a job in Canada, so does that how's the visa thing work? As if an American citizen is interested in it?
It's we take care of all the visa stuff. I suspect anybody watching this may ask if remote is a possibility, and I feel bad because I've done remote for a number of years, but I need to write up a blog post of this to explain why we don't do remote. Ottawa's a nice city. Toronto's lovely. But yeah, these are on site, and if you are in the States or anywhere else and are interested at working at Shopify, we'll definitely put together all the paperwork and get you over here. We set up the work visas, so it's usually fairly straightforward. Not always, but most of the time, yeah.
Yeah, and I know working for a few companies with Canadian and other employees, sometimes it's tougher trying to get into the U.S. to do jobs like that versus I'm sure. It sounds like it's a little bit easier getting up to Canada. So awesome. Well, I hope people interested. I know kind of the fun thing, actually the most exciting thing about this industry is there's constantly need for more people. And one of the reasons that I do this podcast and continue to try and put content out is that the more people can learn, the faster they can skill up, the faster they can get out there and just get these amazing jobs, because there are so many of them showing up every day. It's my Twitter feed, like just kind of a constant just job board some days.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that I've recognized now, being in sort of the hiring manager position, and recognizing that I feel like I need to do more on the education side of things, and help mentor people that may just be starting out, because there's a huge need. It's a growing industry in all aspects, design, development, whatever. And so the more people we have doing this stuff, the better we can all be, and the more stuff we can get done.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, Jonathan, for coming by, and for Spotify, i.e. Shopify. It's great to get a chance to talk to you. I mean, we've been at a couple of conferences together, and really just I think we sat down at the same breakfast table once, but that's about probably the longest I had a chance to talk to you. So glad to have this opportunity. It's exciting to hear what's going up in Shopify. If you guys were doing remote, I'd probably talk to you a little bit more. I know we just bought a house, so we're not going to do anything for a while.
I understand.
But if you are out there in a position where you can move around a little bit, I would going out to like Toronto. Was that one of them?
Yes.
Okay. Would be a blast. I mean, I'm a big travel fan, so getting a chance to go out there and experience a new big city with lots of culture and lots of food and lots of stuff happening is always an exciting thing. So yeah, if you're interested in that, definitely get in touch with Jonathan Snook, get in touch with Shopify and the career page. But again, thanks for coming by this week and talking to us for a bit about what you're doing and about SMACSS. Are you speaking anywhere soon, or should people try and catch you there?
I am. I've got a couple conferences coming up. I'm going to be at GenerateConf in New York City in April, I believe. There's BDConf in Nashville and Front End Design Conf in Florida. So I'll be at those 3 places, of course, talking about SMACSS. So.
Of course. It's what you do, and you do it well.
It is what I do, yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks again for coming by, and for everyone listening, next week we do, I believe, Welch Canavan. We had to cancel a couple weeks ago, but he's scheduled to come in again next week, so I'll get the invitations out for that. I'm really looking forward to. He's been doing some neat stuff with style guides over at National Geographic, so it'll be a fun conversation, and I hope you can catch that as well. So once again, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for everyone watching, and we will catch you next week. See ya.